Morning, everybody. We are on State Building in the Americas, topic 1.4. So before we dive in, we need to do some background work. And I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about the Olmecs and who they were. The Olmec were the most important Mesoamerican civilization in the pre-classical era. They were at their strongest between 1200 and 400 BCE. And as you can see, a lot of the major centers of Olmec civilization were located along the Atlantic coast of Mexico. The Olmecs used raised fields that provided quite a bit of agricultural surplus, and this allowed the Olmec to sustain those urban centers where they weren't able to grow crops the way they could on the outskirts. The center of early Olmec civilization was located at San Lorenzo, and this would in turn give way to other major urban centers, and the Olmec would eventually have three during their peak era of civilization. Archaeologists have discovered large earthen mounds that would dominate the Olmec centers, and what we know is that these cities and then these mounds served for religious practices, the cities themselves for administration and trade practices. My apologies, you can hear the dogs. It is likely that the Olmec political structures were built around some form of kinship. And we know that Olmec power rested on the control of certain commodities and then religious practices. So that tells us that the priests had quite a bit of power. Given their limited technology, the Olmec architecture was incredibly impressive. And I want you to take a look at what you're seeing here. These are called the Olmec Colossal heads, and they have no religious meaning. These were actually created after rulers who probably succeeded in expanding Olmec territory. But again, these are famous kings. And you can see how big they are compared to the average person. They weigh anywhere from 6 to 50 tons. And these were carved out between 1500 to 400, guys. So this was all done by hand. The Olmec also played a role in the development of writing and astronomy. And why we're talking about them so much, obviously they are an incredibly important tribe of people, and their civilization contributed quite a bit to the Maya. And we're going to talk about that, especially when we're looking at writing and astronomy. You guys have heard of the Mayan calendar. The Maya got a lot of their information from the Olmec, and you can see here's the heartland of the Olmec, and then here's the extent of the Mayan Empire. So there's a lot of influence there, guys. Now, I know you'll be reading about the Maya, but they're also a group that you really need to know a lot about because of their achievements and because of how powerful they were. The Maya were a single culture. Again, based on the map, you would see them in modern Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and southern Mexico. But here's the thing about the Maya. They never were a politically unified state, and there were multiple kingdoms that would actually fight each other for regional dominance. The Maya responded to their growing population by increasing their agricultural productivity, so they would drain swamps, build elevated fields, as well as terrace fields, so, stacking them almost. And they also constructed irrigation. So this is incredibly impressive architecture and innovation that is being done by hand. The Maya also managed forest resources to increase the production of desired products. The largest city-states dominated neighboring city-states' agricultural areas. The incredibly impressive and decorated buildings and monuments were done with levers and stone tools. The Mayan believed that the cosmos consisted of three layers, so their religion focuses on these layers: the heavens, the human world, and the underworld. And temple architecture reflected this cosmology, and the rulers and elites would actually serve as priests to sort of intermediate and communicate with residents of these two supernatural worlds. We know that the sacrifice was common and carried out to please the gods. Mayan military forces, when expanding territory, would actually fight for captives. So the goal of this is not just, okay, we're going to expand our borders, we're going to take over another city-state. That's not the main reason they're doing this. They're doing this so they can get people to sacrifice. So elite captives were sacrificed, and then commoners were enslaved. Mayan elite women participated in bloodletting rituals and other ceremonies. They could, but rarely did, hold political power. And non elite women probably played an essential role in agricultural and textile production. The most notable Mayan technological developments are the calendar, mathematics, and their writing system. We know that most Mayan city states were abandoned or completely destroyed between 800 and 900 CE, and possible reasons for this include the disruption of Mesoamerican trade that resulted from the fall of Teotihuacan, and we will talk about them, environmental pressure caused by overpopulation, and continuous warfare among their city states. So, who were the Teotihuacan? We're going to talk about them. Please take note of the Great Palace in Guatemala. Stunning architecture, again, done by hand, guys. Simple tools. So Teotihuacan was a very large Mesoamerican city. The height of their power is between 450 and 600 CE. And we know the city had a population of about 125 to 150,000 people. Teotihuacan culture was dominated by religious structures, including pyramids and temples where human sacrifice was carried out. This is where the famous Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon are. The growth of Teotihuacan was made possible by forced relocation of farm families to the city and then agricultural innovations. So again, irrigation, but also something called chinampas, which mean floating gardens. This would increase production and then, in turn, support a large and growing population. The elite lived in residential compounds that separated them from commoners, and they controlled the state bureaucracy, tax collection, and commerce. And rather than just one king, Teotihuacan was ruled by an alliance of wealthy families. The military was used to protect and expand long distance trade and ensure that farmers paid taxes and tribute to the elites. The civilization collapsed around 750 CE, and this could be the result of invasion or conflict within the elite, but their collapse is what led to the Mayan collapse. And a lot of people, when they think of the Aztec civilization, Teotihuacan comes to mind because this was where a lot of human sacrifice by the Aztecs was carried out, the Pyramid of the Sun, Pyramid of the Moon. The Aztecs did not build these, though. They found them, and then this would become almost a religious center for the Aztecs. But again, already there. So, if you ever have a chance, guys, Teotihuacan is about a 45-minute bus ride away from the capital city of Mexico. Definitely worth it. Check it out. Stunning. Yes, that is me. Hello. All right, so the Aztecs. The Aztecs were originally a northern people within a clan-based organization. They migrated to the city of Tenochtitlan. This would become their capital city, and this is where you actually see the floating city. The city on a lake is Tenochtitlan. Gender division of labor was distinct yet complementary, guys. People worked together in harmony. Yes, they have different tasks, but they all recognize they can't do one without the other. Warfare increased male power. Females maintained control over the household and the market, but they also worked as teachers and priestesses. The kings increased their wealth and power by means of territorial conquest. And when a new king took the throne, it was sort of a requirement / badge of honor to go out and increase the size of the Aztec Empire. As a result of this, a lot of people are not going to like the Aztecs. They're going to make a lot of enemies, and this is going to come back later and play a role in their downfall. The Aztecs increased agricultural production by borrowing some of the technological innovations from Teotihuacan, excuse me. And again, this is where you see the chinampas, the irrigation, and grain and other food tribute met about 1/4 of the capital foods requirements. Merchants were subordinate to the political elite. Technology of trade was simple. There were no wheeled vehicles, there were no draft animals, and money was used. Goods were carried by human porters and exchanged through bartering. And the Aztecs worshipped a number of gods. The most important was the sun god Quetzalcoatl, who required a diet of human hearts. And again, much of the sacrifice is carried out by conquests. And this is why a lot of people did not like the Aztecs. The empire would fall in 1521 with the invasion of Spanish conquistadors, who were actually helped by neighboring tribes. And guys, there were only 600 Spanish conquistadors. More would come later on. The Aztecs outnumber them greatly, but these Spanish invaders had guns, they had suits of armor and swords, but that wasn't the number one factor of the downfall of the Aztecs. It was disease. There's a great book for your reference. It's called Gun, Germs, and Steel. All right, so taking a look at the mound builders. Now, you may have learned about these people in your U.S. history class. So we're going to talk about them, the mound builders, the Hopewell, and Mississippi cultures. So we're looking at Cahokia. And again, I'm not sure if you guys have already learned about them, but we're going to go over them again anyway. So the Hopewell culture developed out of the earlier Adena culture around 100 CE. And originally, they're based in the Ohio Valley, but their trade and influence will extend as far as Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, New York, and Ontario. And a lot of this culture is actually going to intermingle with other tribes. So not so much even in language, but building these mounds. Even the town that I grew up in, there is a mound that it's half natural, half man-made. It's called Spanish Hill, and it was home to the Susquehannock, and we can talk about them later. But what we're looking at is the Hopewell centers. They're ruled by hereditary chiefs who would serve as priests, and they also manage secular affairs or non-religious affairs, such as long-distance trade. These mounds were built as burial sites and as platforms for temples. The Hopewell sites were abandoned around 400 CE, but that technology would continue, and this is what leads us to the Cahokia in present-day Illinois. What we know is that the Cahokia had a population of about 30,000 people. Around 1250, Cahokia was abandoned, possibly because of population pressure or climate change. At its peak of 1050 to 1200 CE, Cahokia was larger than many European cities, and that includes London, guys. The city was spread out over 6 square miles. There were at least 120 mounds, and in this city alone at this time, 10,000 to 20,000 people. They were located across the Mississippi River from modern-day St. Louis. They are the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. So what we know, and based on cultural and archaeological evidence, is there was a popular game called Chunky. I'll talk about that in a minute, as well as a caffeine-loaded drink. Thank all the stars for the caffeine. Artistic finds include stone tablets carved with images, such as Birdman, as well as evidence of sophisticated copperworking, and this includes jewelry and headdresses. So Chunky, we're not entirely sure what the exact rules were. So accounts of the game tell of a stone disc, or the chunky stone, that would be rolled onto a playing field, and then people would throw giant sticks, like sticks that were bigger than themselves, trying to land it to as close to the stone as possible. Gambling was, on the outcome of this game was pretty popular too. And the population, guys, this is what's really unique about Cahokia, is a lot of the people who lived there were immigrants, and they came from the Midwest, possibly as far away as the Great Lakes and the Gulf Coast. And we get this from studying their teeth. To the south of Cahokia, other settlements were found. They were abandoned around the time that Cahokia was at their peak. So what archaeologists think is that these people actually moved to Cahokia and they were welcome. Unfortunately, a lot of these mounds have been destroyed, so Cahokia is now being preserved. And we also know, again, because of extensive excavation, that Cahokia did partake in human sacrifice, and the largest mound of human sacrifice holds the remains of 272 people. Many of them show signs of being sacrificed, probably as part of a burial ritual, and it's the largest number of sacrificial victims found north of Mexico. And our final group that we're going to be looking at are the Nazca. We know they were divided into a hierarchy of social classes, and they were a state that was both a theocracy and a military society. Power was concentrated in the priests and the military leaders. They're the landowners. We know they built pyramids, and we also know that they created these very interesting engravings, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. The Nazca Society did not have a unified government. It's a group of individual manors. Each manor had their own authority, who was typically a priest. They occupied the valleys, and in turn, there were settlements that focused solely on agriculture. This is actually quite comparable to the manor system of Europe. It's accepted that the expansion of the Nazca culture was a military, a very powerful, violent military, because of the extensive fortified cities found in the Nazca area, as well as plenty of weapons found in tombs, and the custom of trophy heads, which would actually adorn the graves of elite military troops. Nazca economy was fundamentally based on agriculture. Crops were corn, beans, pumpkin, squash, yucca, guava, peanuts, peppers, and cotton. Fishing for shellfish was also pretty common. And we also know that there was quite a bit of trade happening. Vital importance there, guys, because the only way that all of the needs of the population could be met was through a continuous trade with Huarpa culture. And they would exchange products like potatoes and wool in exchange for fish, cotton, and ceramics from the Nazca. The Nazca are also known for their knowledge of water resources, especially subterranean water resources, and they use this for irrigation. We know that the Nazca metal workers would actually beat gold into thin sheets, and then these were used to create masks that could be worn over the face, particularly over the nose and the mouth, leaving the eyes exposed. As well as decorative items. But unlike a lot of cultures, they preferred the sheen of gold. So they would flatten it, they would engrave it, they would make designs, but they wouldn't decorate it with jewels. But perhaps what the Nazca are best known for are the famous Nazca lines. And they're a series of ancient geoglyphs found in the Nazca Desert in southern Peru. And they were made between 400 and 650 BCE. And here's the thing, guys. So these are beautiful. They're fairly easy to create because you could easily engrave onto the stone. Now, that being said, some of these are, I mean, guys, notice the shape, notice the symmetry, notice how well they're done, okay? Some of these are over 200 feet high. So that begs the question, how were they able to do this? How were they able to create these in essentially perfection with not being able to see what they were doing as it was being done? So that's what we're stopping for today. And the answer is not aliens, no matter what the History Channel tells you. Anyway, have a great night, guys. Cheers.